The burning sensation started in the corner of my right eye. Not in both, just the right one, which made me think it was fatigue, you know. That dry feeling you get when you spend hours staring at dark asphalt. But then came the second, deeper one, and I realized I was tearing up involuntarily, and my throat had a metallic taste that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. I downshifted without understanding why. My body made the decision before I did. What I didn't know yet was that the passenger side door had been locked from the outside before I left the terminal. I've been doing that route for about 3 years. Terminal in Flagstaff, down Highway 40, delivery in Albuquerque, return. About 6 hours each way if traffic isn't bad, and that night there was nobody on the road. The problem is, I shouldn't have been there. It was Curtis's route. He called about 2 hours before saying he was feeling unwell, something with his stomach, and the dispatcher texted me asking me to cover. It wasn't the first time I'd covered for someone, so I didn't think much about it. I should have. I did the cargo inspection myself, which was already strange because normally someone from the yard is there to sign. That night, according to the dispatcher, no one was available. I signed it myself, checked the seal, and went up to the cabin. That's when I saw the note on the clipboard. No, wait, it wasn't a note, it was just a regular work order. But it had a handwritten line underneath that said something like, heater inspected, tested, okay. No name. No stamp. I looked at it for a couple of seconds and put it aside. The maintenance guy who worked on the heater, I'd never seen him before. I only found out about it later when I went to ask. They said he was a contractor, that he'd been called because the regular technician was off duty. Nobody knew his exact name. Nobody had asked for identification. At the time I was leaving the yard, it was 11:40 p.m. The temperature outside was around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, and I turned on the heater without thinking twice because it was freezing cold inside the cabin. I think it was around mile 187 that the burning sensation returned, this time in both eyes. I blinked 3 times, rubbed them with the back of my hand, and thought, dry air, heater on, long night. It makes sense. There was a small crack in the passenger side window seal that I knew had been there for a while, and the cold air coming in through there was bothering me more than usual. So I closed it. Simple as that. I pulled the zipper, it closed, and the wind noise disappeared. What I didn't realize, and look, I only understood this much later, when an investigator explained it to me, is that that crack was the only real ventilation point the cabin had at that moment. The heater was recirculating the internal air. I didn't even remember locking the driver's window before leaving the terminal, one of those automatic things you do without registering. So when I closed the passenger window, everything was sealed. I created a closed chamber without knowing that something was being released inside it. I kept driving. I put on a podcast, I don't remember which one, something about American history that I listen to when the route is too long and straight. The burning sensation subsided, or maybe I got used to it, I can't tell now. My throat still had that metallic taste, but I took a sip of coffee and associated it with the old coffee in the thermos. I still had about 2 hours to go to Albuquerque. The road was completely empty, and the heater worked perfectly, without noise, without fluctuation. Nothing that would make me stop. I don't know exactly when things changed. Like there wasn't a clear point where I thought, something is really wrong. It was too gradual for me to fixate on it. I realized I was doing 47 in a 65 range without consciously slowing down. I looked at the speedometer, processed the number, and it took me 3 or 4 seconds to understand what that meant. That delay scared me more than the speed itself, but even so, I didn't stop. I accelerated back as if solving the symptom would solve the problem. The lane markings started to give me trouble. It wasn't that I was asleep, it was different. I could see the line, I knew where it was, but there was a delay between seeing it and correcting it. Like driving with a slight lag in everything. I tried to open the window, I don't know exactly why. I think it was instinct. And my hand went to the latch, but my fingers didn't close properly on the first try. I had to look at my hand to be able to hold it. I looked back at the road, and the truck had drifted about 6 or 7 feet to the right. I corrected it. I took a deep breath. The air had a taste that I can't quite describe. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't exhaust fumes, it was heavier than that. It lingered in my throat. That's when I saw the steam, coming out of one of the heater ducts on the right side of the panel, right underneath. It wasn't much, just a thin stream, almost invisible if the light wasn't hitting it at the right angle. I looked at it and thought, faulty heater, I'm going to complain to the terminal. I didn't think about stopping. I couldn't put together the thought process of stopping, you know? Each thought came and went before I could finish. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't decide what to do about it anymore. I remember thinking I needed to get out of the truck. It wasn't a complete thought, more of a feeling, like my body sending a signal that my head couldn't quite process anymore. I took my foot off the accelerator. The truck started to lose speed on its own, and I turned to the door. The handle was there. I pulled. It didn't open. I pulled again. I put 2 fingers on the latch, tried to turn it, tried to push first and then pull, that thing you do when a door is stuck. Nothing. I hit it with the palm of my hand once, twice. My arm was heavy in a way that's hard to describe, like lead under my skin. I knew the door wasn't stuck. Somewhere deep down I knew, but I couldn't put the thought together to understand what that meant. The truck was still moving when I stopped trying. I don't know the speed, I think around 20, maybe less. I slid to the side, my shoulder hit the dashboard, and the last thing I registered was the trickle of steam coming out of the duct, still there, calm, as if nothing was wrong. There was no loud noise, no impact, nothing dramatic. Just the steam, and then darkness. The accident report says the truck hit the guardrail at 11 Tamibrow. I didn't feel it. The emergency system automatically triggered something I didn't even know the vehicle had, some kind of impact sensor, and sent coordinates to the Fleet Monitoring Center. The paramedics arrived in about 20 minutes. The driver's door was locked from the outside with a bicycle lock. One of those common black combination locks, the kind you buy at any convenience store for less than $10. They broke the window to get in. The cylinder was secured with nylon cable ties under the dashboard, connected to the heater's return duct. The investigator told me it was smaller than he expected when he went to pick it up. The agent was a mucosal irritant, not lethal in open spaces, but in a closed cabin with air recirculation for 2 hours. The concentration was enough to temporarily compromise the central nervous system. Temporarily was the word he used. I spent 3 days in the hospital. I left with what the doctor called inflammation in the lower airways, in practice pain when breathing deeply for weeks, and a dry cough that took about 2 months to completely go away. My right lung still appears different in the tests. I don't know what this means in the long term. Nobody gave me a direct answer about it. The outsourced worker was never identified. The maintenance company that had the contract said they didn't send anyone that night and that the call wasn't in their system. Curtis, the driver I replaced, was interviewed. He said he was genuinely unwell, that it had nothing to do with him. Maybe that's true. Maybe not. The investigation remained open for months, and the last time I asked the lawyer, he said the case was ongoing. That was quite a while ago. I requested a terminal transfer about 6 weeks after I was discharged. I didn't give the dispatcher a long explanation. I just said I needed a different route, and he didn't ask anything else. I started driving full-time again about 4 months after the accident. Daytime route, different terminal, different truck. My right lung still appears different in periodic exams. The doctor talks about residual alteration and changes the subject when I ask what that means in 10 years. Before each trip, I check the heater duct. It's not paranoia, it's just what I do now. It takes me about 2 minutes. I run my hand under the panel, look with my cell phone flashlight. The guys from the new yard have seen me do this several times and never asked anything. Once one of them started to open his mouth and I looked at him in a way that made him shut up. I think I prefer they don't ask. I don't really know what I would answer. The padlock was sent to the lab. They said it was a mass-produced model without a traceable serial number, and that the inner lining was made of a material that doesn't retain fingerprints effectively. Whoever put it there knew this or was lucky. They never found out who it belonged to. They never found out who the third-party contractor was. The case is still open. At least that's what they tell me when I ask, which is becoming less and less frequent. I stop asking when I realize the answer isn't going to change. If you're a fan of these stories, do me a solid. Hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. It tells the YouTube algorithm to push this video out to more people. I appreciate the support. The handwriting was slanted to the left, girl. and the sentence fit on a single line. I saw what you did in 1998. I read it 3 times before realizing I was holding the paper with both hands, without having decided to pick it up. It was almost 2 in the morning. The rest stop parking lot was empty, and the only car that had been there when I left the bathroom, a white sedan with a fogged-up driver's side window, had vanished. What stopped me wasn't the sentence. It was the paper, worn at the edges with a dark stain in the corner that looked like old grease, folded in a way that indicated it had been stored for a while before someone decided to use it. I've been taking the same route for 2 years. I leave Nashville, go down Highway 24, cross Alabama, and arrive in Mobile. My rest stop is always at the same rest stop in Georgia, near mile 111, because the bathroom is clean and has a coffee machine that actually works. That night I had stopped earlier than usual, about 40 minutes before my usual time, because the traffic had been flowing better after Chattanooga. A small detail, irrelevant at the time, except that someone who knew my usual schedule would have arrived late. I had first seen the white car about 4 days earlier at a gas station in Tennessee. I didn't pay much attention. It was an ordinary sedan, the license plate partially obscured by dried mud. I saw it again 2 days later, on the shoulder of Highway 72, on the opposite side of the road. I noticed it because it was exactly the same shoulder I use for quick breaks when I need to. At the time, I thought it was a coincidence, that the road is the road and everyone stops in the same places. I didn't write down the license plate. I didn't register anyone's face. That night at the rest stop, when I went into the bathroom, there was a man washing his hands at the sink in the back. Middle-aged, dark jacket. He didn't look in the mirror when I went in, which is the kind of thing you notice without realizing you noticed it. I stayed in there for about 3 minutes. When I came out, he was already gone. I went straight to the truck, saw the note on the windshield wiper, and only then realized that I hadn't heard any other vehicles leave the parking lot while I was in the bathroom. I stood outside the truck for about 2 or 3 minutes. I didn't go in. I didn't go out. I just stood there with the note in my hand looking at the empty parking lot. My head was trying to piece together some logic, some explanation that would make sense of it. Someone's playing a prank. Someone made a mistake. Someone confused my truck with another. None of those explanations lasted more than 5 seconds before I remembered that the handwriting was slanted the same way in all the words, that the paper was worn in a way that indicated it had been stored for a while, and that the parking lot had been empty before I went into the bathroom. That's when I saw it. Next to the trash can on the ground, there was something light, almost white, which I initially thought was a discarded napkin. I almost ignored it, but it had a fold in the middle that was identical to the note. And when I got closer, I saw the dark stain in the corner. Same position, same size. I picked it up without thinking much. It was a photo, printed on regular paper, the kind you print at home on a normal printer. Faded at the edges, grainy, as if the original file were old or had been photographed from another photo. It took me a while to understand what I was seeing. The photo showed a young man, probably 16 or 17, in front of a house that I recognized before recognizing the face. It was my grandmother's house in Murfreesboro. It took me a few more seconds and then I froze. The young man was me. I didn't remember anyone taking that photo. I didn't remember that specific day. I had no idea where that image had come from or who had had access to it. I climbed into the truck and locked the door. I put the photo on the passenger seat, the note beside it, and stared at them both for a time I can't estimate. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, and another part wanted to understand who had done this before going anywhere. I chose to stay a few more minutes. I can't say if it was the dumbest decision or if it didn't matter, because now I think the person who put that there already knew exactly what I was going to do. I pulled out of the rest stop and onto Highway 24 feeling like I'd made the wrong decision staying there for so long. There was no clear logic to this thought. It was just a pressure in my chest that I couldn't name. I drove for about 10 minutes in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of the engine and the asphalt. That's when I saw the white sedan appear in my left rearview mirror, about 6 or 7 vehicles behind it. It could have been any car. It could have been a coincidence. I suddenly changed to the right lane without using my turn signal and just stared at my reflection. The sedan moved along with it. Not immediately. It took about 20 seconds, but it moved. It maintained the same distance, didn't accelerate, didn't cut in. It just stayed there. I slowed down about 5 mph below the normal flow to see what would happen. The cars behind us overtook one by one until the sedan was next. It also slowed down. It stayed exactly where it was, as if the distance between us was a measure it had decided to maintain. I tried to see the driver in the rearview mirror, but the light was bad, and the car was always positioned just right so I couldn't see. I continued like that for about 40 minutes. I changed lanes 3 more times, twice without signaling and once abruptly, almost getting honked at by another truck. The sedan followed suit every time. At no point did it try to get closer. At no point did it try to overtake me. It just kept going. I started to feel something strange, hard to explain, that was almost worse than if it had accelerated. Because if it accelerated, I would know what to do. This, I didn't know. When I took the exit to a larger gas station to refuel, the sedan didn't move with me. It stayed on the highway. I stood at the pump for about 5 minutes waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't. I took out my cell phone to call my brother. I don't really know why. I think I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. Before I finished dialing the number, the phone vibrated with a call from an unknown number. 12 digits, no recognizable area code. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it dropped and stared at the number on the screen for about 30 seconds. My hand was resting on the gas pump, and I realized I was holding on too tightly, like anchoring myself to something. The number called again before I put my phone away. I let it ring again. When it dropped for the second time, I was already inside the truck with the door locked. I don't remember making that decision consciously. The third call came about 40 seconds later. I answered before thinking. I didn't say anything, just held the phone to my ear, waiting. The voice was a man's, calm, unhurried, and the first thing he said was an address. Callaway Street, number 414, Murfreesboro. It was my grandmother's house. The exact address, pronounced slowly as if he were reading it from somewhere. After about 2 seconds of silence, he said he had enough documentation and that he would contact my employer the following week if I didn't answer a second call the next day at 9 in the morning. And he hung up. I sat at the gas station for I don't know how long. The photo was still on the passenger seat, with the ticket beside it. I stared at the photo for a while, trying to remember 1998 in a way that made sense with what that voice was implying. There are things that happen when you're 17 that you don't process at the time and end up pushing into a place in your memory where they seem smaller. I won't go into detail about what it was. I'll just say it wasn't anything I'd truly forgotten, just something I'd stopped thinking about. And apparently, someone else hadn't stopped thinking about it either. I answered the third time the number called. I hadn't planned to answer, it was automatic. My thumb hit the button before I could process it. The voice was a middle-aged man's, calm in a way that didn't match anything that was happening. It wasn't the voice of someone nervous or agitated. It was the tone of someone reading a shopping list. He said a name I hadn't heard in at least 15 years, of someone I was convinced no one else associated with me anymore. I was speechless for about 3 seconds. I tried to say something, I don't even know what I was going to say, and he hung up. No threat, no instruction, no request. Just the name, and then silence on the line. I stared at my phone for a while, I can't even measure it. The gas station was busy. People were filling up. A truck bigger than mine was maneuvering on the other side of the island. Everything seemed normal around me, and I was completely frozen in the middle of it all, unable to organize a single thought. I tried to call back. The number no longer existed. It gave an immediate routing error and didn't even ring once. I went to the gas station bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror for a while. I don't remember what I expected to see. When I returned to the truck, the photo was still on the passenger seat, and the note was next to it. I took both and put them in the glove compartment. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I left the gas station, got back on the highway, and it was only when I picked up speed that I realized I had forgotten to refuel. I didn't go to the police. I thought about it several times in the first few weeks. I put together what I would say. I imagined the detective listening to me, and I always stopped at the same point. The note said, I saw what you did in 1998, and any investigation would eventually lead to that question. What did you do in 1998, Mason? And I didn't want to answer that in an official setting. So I didn't go. I kept the note and the photo in the glove compartment and continued working as if nothing had happened, which was probably the longest mistake I've ever made. The first 2 weeks were the worst. I couldn't drive a night route without checking my rearview mirror every 3 or 4 minutes. I stopped using the rest stop at mile marker 111 and started only stopping at busy gas stations, always near other people. I started only answering calls from numbers I recognized, which created problems with dispatchers, clients, and everyone who needed quick contact. I slept poorly during mandatory rest stops, that shallow, unrefreshing sleep, and I arrived late for deliveries, which I couldn't properly justify. The manager called me in after a month. It wasn't a long conversation. He said he'd received 2 complaints about lateness, that my time log was irregular, and that I seemed different. That was the word he used, different. He asked if everything was all right. I said yes. He looked at me for about 3 seconds without saying anything, and then said he'd need to temporarily reassign me to a shorter route. Less responsibility, less pressure. In practice, it was a demotion, without calling it a demotion. I signed the paper and left the room without arguing because I had no argument I could use without explaining the rest. I went back to my normal route after about 3 months. The manager didn't make a fuss, just sent the new log by message and said he hoped I was okay. I went. I did the route about 4 times without a problem, slept better, stopped at the usual places. I had almost convinced myself that it had been something isolated, some disturbed person who had chosen my truck by chance and given up. Almost. On the 5th route, I stopped at the rest stop at mile 111. I needed to. There wasn't another viable stop within a 40-mile radius, and I still had almost 3 hours of driving ahead of me. The coffee maker had a maintenance notice stuck to the front. I used the bathroom, went back to the truck, and before getting in, I glanced at the trash can next to me because of a reflex I didn't even know I had developed. There was a folded photo resting on the edge, not thrown inside, just resting there, with the dark stain in the right corner the same size and in the same position as the first one. I didn't pick it up. I got in the truck, locked the door, and left the parking lot without looking in the rearview mirror even once because I had decided I didn't want to know what was there. The ticket and the first photo are still in the glove compartment. I don't know why I haven't thrown them away. I think part of me believes that throwing them away changes something, and another part knows that it doesn't change anything at all. The smell came before anything else. Not smoke, not rubber, not the kind of smell that makes you break. It was solvent, strong, the kind that sticks to the back of your throat, and I associated it with some road work on the shoulder even before seeing what was ahead. When the headlights hit the wall, I was already maybe 200 feet away, and the road was straight, no curves, no detours, and the wall closed everything off on either side, painted exactly like the asphalt, the yellow lines, the continuation of the lane. I slammed on the brakes, but not all the way, because my brain was still processing if it was real. It was maybe a 2-second delay. The truck hit at about 15 mph, and the wall didn't give way. I know that stretch of Arizona well. I take Highway 40 west from Flagstaff, then turn onto a state road that cuts through the desert to Kingman. Flat, long, with nothing on either side but dry brush and red rocks. At night there's no lighting beyond a certain point, just headlights in the asphalt. That night I left later than planned because of a cargo conference that was delayed. It was almost 11 when I got on the state road, and from the start I didn't cross paths with any other vehicles. About 15 miles before the point where it all happened, I passed 2 road signs covered with black tarps tied with tape. It wasn't uncommon to see covered signage in construction areas, so I slowed down a bit, looked both ways expecting to see machinery or workers, and saw nothing. No lights, no vehicles, no visible changes to the asphalt. I thought the construction was further ahead. I continued on. The cones appeared about 3 miles later. They were reasonably spaced, had reflectors, and there was a makeshift wooden sign with "Road Work Ahead" written in orange paint. I slowed down, followed the indicated detour, and entered a side road that I didn't remember using before, but that seemed normal, reasonable asphalt. adequate width for the truck. The smell of solvent started about 400 feet before the wall. I still hadn't understood what the covered signs meant. I stayed inside the cab for about 2 minutes without moving. It wasn't a conscious decision to wait, it was my body that didn't obey immediately. The airbag hadn't deployed. The speed was too low for that, but the impact had been enough to throw everything on the passenger seat onto the floor. My thermos rolled all the way to the brake pedal. I stared at it for a while, not understanding why I was looking. When I got out, the smell of solvent was much stronger outside. The headlights still illuminated the wall in front, and the paint reflected in a way that seemed almost too perfect up close. The yellow lines were of uniform thickness, the details of the asphalt were just right. I walked around the side of the truck, assessing the damage to the front, dented but not destroyed. And it was while walking back that I stepped on something on the shoulder. It was a paint roller lying there, with the foam still damp, leaving a dark stain on the asphalt where it rested. I looked at it for about 3 seconds before looking back at the wall. It wasn't the kind of thing someone accidentally forgets. It was large, heavy, industrial grade, and it was about 6 feet from the side of the truck in a place where it wouldn't have any reason to be if it weren't for what was in front of me. I touched the surface of the wall with 2 fingers. The paint immediately stained thick and white, and the structure behind it wasn't concrete, it was lightweight plywood, the kind you buy at any home improvement store for less than $20 a sheet. I took a step back and looked at the whole thing. The wall, the roller, the cones still visible back there at the entrance to the turnoff. And I began to understand that none of it had been hastily assembled. Someone had spent hours here before me. I got back in the truck and tried to reverse. The engine responded, the gear engaged, but when I released the clutch, the vehicle pulled sharply to the right and stopped. I got out again, knowing more or less what I was going to find. The front right tire was completely flat, the sidewall sunk against the asphalt. I used my cell phone flashlight to reach the entrance of the detour and illuminated the ground. The road studs were scattered in a strip about 15 feet wide, small, black, practically invisible against the dark asphalt. Someone had thrown them there before setting up the cones. I stood in the middle of that stretch for a while trying to calculate options. Changing the tire would take time, and I would have to do it in the dark, alone, in a place that clearly wasn't a traffic accident. I picked up my cell phone to call 911 and there was 1 bar, sometimes 2, enough to ring, but the call dropped twice before completing. On the 3rd attempt, it stayed connected for about 40 seconds. I said where I was, started to explain, and the line died mid-sentence. I don't know if anyone heard enough to understand. I went to the side of the truck to get the tire-changing equipment and stopped. There were marks on the asphalt that I hadn't noticed before, light semicircles where cones had been dragged and repositioned more than once, as if the detour had been adjusted, tested, corrected. It wasn't the first time that setup had been used. The paint roller was about 3 feet from where I had stepped before, and I was sure I hadn't kicked it. I looked at the wall. I looked at the cones. I looked at my phone with the bar disappearing and reappearing, and I realized that since I had gotten off the truck for the 2nd time, I hadn't heard any sound coming from the desert. No insects, no wind, no animals. The kind of silence that isn't the absence of sound. It's containment. I was standing with my back to the wall trying to put the jack under the axle when I heard it. It wasn't a bang, it wasn't a voice. It was a dry crack of wood snapping into place, like a large door being opened by someone who knows the mechanism. I turned around. An entire section of the wall had opened inwards about 8 feet wide, and the men came out in a line. I counted 4. All with cameras, 2 in hand and 2 on shoulder mounts, all turned on, all pointed at me and the truck. None of them said anything. I stood there, not knowing what to do. It wasn't exactly fear. It was a confusion of signals, because none of them were armed in a way I could see. None of them advanced towards me, they simply started working. One went to photograph the tires, one went to film the crumpled front of the truck, one filmed me from about 15 feet away without moving, and the 4th went to the cones and started dismantling them with the efficiency of someone who had done it before. I tried to speak, I asked what was happening, and nobody answered. Nobody looked at me as if I had said anything. They stayed for about 20 minutes. They documented everything. The wall, the cones, the tacks, the tire, the damage. Me standing in the middle of it all. unable to decide whether to try to walk away through the desert or stay. When they finished, they returned through the same opening in a line. The last one pulled the section of the wall back into place, and the dry snap repeated itself. The mechanism closed. I was alone again in the same silence as before, with the crushed truck in front of the wall and the tacks still scattered at the entrance to the detour behind me. The rescue arrived about 2 hours later. A highway patrol car and a truck. The police officer walked around the site with a flashlight, noted everything, photographed the tire and the front of the truck. When I explained the wall, he looked at me in a way I recognized, the look of someone deciding how much to believe what they're hearing. I went to where the section had opened and showed him the marks of the wood fittings. He took notes. The wall was still standing, but the cones, tacks, and paint roller were gone. Someone had returned while I waited for the rescue and collected everything. The investigation lasted a few weeks. No suspects identified, no traffic cameras in that stretch, no witnesses. The wall was examined and confirmed to be plywood painted with hyper-realistic paint, the type used in set design, which explained the solvent smell and the quality of the illusion. The expert said the painting had been done by someone with technical expertise. That was all the concrete evidence from the investigation. 2 weeks after the accident, someone sent a link to the company's email. The video was on a platform I'd never heard of, a closed forum, and it showed everything in high definition. The truck crashing, me getting out confused, me standing there while they filmed, me trying to talk to men who weren't responding. The manager called me the next day. It wasn't about the accident itself, it was about the video. He said the company was concerned about the exposure, that clients had seen it, that they needed to understand what had happened on that stretch of road and why I had taken an unauthorized detour without activating the alternate route protocol. I explained. He listened. In the end, I said they would need to review my contract. I didn't go into detail about what that meant because I already knew. I left the sector about 4 months later. It wasn't a decision I made on a specific day. It was a combination of things that made staying less and less viable. The contract was revised as the manager had anticipated. The new conditions didn't make sense to accept, and I didn't have the energy to negotiate anything at that moment. I quit, signed what I needed to sign, and left without making a speech to anyone. I'm in a different role now, without a truck, without a route, without any traffic cones ahead. The video is still online. I don't know how many places it's in. I don't check. But every now and then a message pops up from a number I don't have in my contacts with a link and no text. Sometimes it's someone I met at some point in my career. Sometimes it's a completely unknown number. Everyone sends it as if it were the first time someone was showing me that. I never open the link. I don't need to. I know exactly what's there. But my phone keeps vibrating every now and then. And every time it vibrates at night, I take a couple of seconds before looking at the screen, because part of me still hopes it's something else. To keep these stories coming, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. That engagement is fuel for the channel. It helps YouTube deliver these videos to more folks out on the highway. Stay safe, and keep the shiny side up.